Confederate statues, hate or history. It has been over 150 years since the U.S. Civil War, but the debate still rages on how history will remember the losing side. In 2016, the nonprofit Southern Poverty Law Center reported that over 700 Confederate statues and monuments were still throughout the U.S. Many individuals believe that for better or worse, monuments to Confederate heroes are part of our story. But these statues often serve as offensive reminders of racism and slavery in American history. Tonight, my presentation will take a closer look at the history of Confederate statues, why they should be removed, and where they should go once they are removed. First, let's take a look at the history of Confederate statues. Many of them were erected decades after the fall of the Confederacy, as a way to remind African Americans of their place in society. The intention was to intimidate blacks while reinforcing white power structures in the U.S., and the vast majority of them were created during the height of the Jim Crow movement, which were laws that disqualified African Americans from the right to vote, restricted their movements, and represented the attempt to reassert control over African Americans even after slavery ended. Recent decisions by local governments to remove these memorials triggered a backlash. Many Americans recognize that slavery was immoral. However, some say that these spaces should be preserved as a reminder of the country's darker past. Additionally, some Americans see their removal as an attempt to challenge U.S. history and Southern culture, according to BBC News. But these statues do not honor history or heroes. They were created as political weapons and part of an effort to hide the truth, which is that the Confederacy was on the wrong side of not just history, but humanity. According to the mayor of New Orleans, these monuments help distort history, put forth a myth of Southern chivalry, and distracted from the terror tactics that deprived African Americans of fundamental rights until the 1960s. These monuments are a symbol of the effort to ensure African Americans stayed politically and economically in bondage. Robert E. Lee was a white supremacist and a slave owner who was willing to die for the right to own other human beings. And he even argued in an 1856 letter that slavery was good for black people because it gave them a painful discipline that is necessary for their education as a race. This is not the kind of people we should honor with statues. Furthermore, some people believe that they should let them stand to remind ourselves of who we are and what we aren't. The cost our ancestors paid for our freedom and to educate our children. However, Hitler was a major part of Germany's history, but the Germans rejected him as a traitor to his people. That is why there is no statues of Hitler in Berlin. And is the Confederacy any different than Hitler? It was created as an act of treason against the U.S., so why celebrate treason when monuments and statues? After all, it's not like people forgot Hitler just because there is no statues to honor him. Yes, it is important to honor our history and not forget it. That is why monuments belong in museums. According to Richmond Times, that way they can be presented in historical contents. An enormous statue of a bronze man in the center of a town does little more than imply that he is someone important or noteworthy. This could be further from the truth. The Confederates fought against the nation to preserve slavery. For these monuments to be true teaching tools, they belong in museums where viewers can learn about the evils of slavery and racism. Not all historical figures had a positive impact on American history, but the Confederate statues will have an everlasting one. Tonight, I have told you a little bit history of the Confederate statues, why I believe that they should be removed, and where they should go once they are removed. Everyone alive today has inherited this country's difficult history. It's important to remember that even the most shameful parts of it. But there is a difference between remembering and memorializing. These statues were designed to celebrate the Confederacy. They were established in the Jim Crow era to terrify African Americans, and they promoted white supremacy and racism. Each Confederate honored in a statue took arms up against the government of the United States of America. They, by definition, are traitors, and we should not be celebrating that.